Hello ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another video. So the turnout on my last video was overwhelmingly high, and at that, overwhelmingly positive. So because you guys seem to like these kinds of videos, I will indefinitely be making more of them, and then doing gaming live streams instead of making gaming videos, which of course you can always catch here on my channel. Usually on weekends, but I think I am going to start doing some here and there throughout the week. Without further ado, let's get into the video. Here very soon, and by very soon I mean a matter of days, we are going to see the release of the long-awaited new season of The Walking Dead Daryl Dixon, this being Season 2, subtitled The Book of Carol. Now, there have been fan theories out there for quite a while now, and they pretty much started surfacing at the close of Season 1 when we got a post-credit scene featuring Carol. I have not weighed in on any of these yet because I wanted to wait until we were a bit closer to the release date, so in terms of teasers and whatnot, I had all the information possible so I could make a seemingly more accurate prediction as to how they're going to play off the storyline for Season 2. Now, in terms of theories as to where they will end up by the end of the show, that question has seemingly already been answered for us, as the official social media accounts for the show have already announced there will be a Season 3 and it will be set in Spain. At the very least, what this means is they will be staying in Europe throughout Season 2 and not coming back to the United States until at least the end of Season 3. So Rick and Daryl reunion enthusiasts, sorry to disappoint, but it looks like that won't be happening until 2025 at the earliest. The news of Season 3 being set in Spain also brings in the possibility for a really cool iteration of an adaptation from one of the lesser-known offshoots of the Walking Dead comics, which I will talk about, but before we get into that, let's talk about how Season 2 may be formatted. So I think the very obvious statement I'm going to make is that Carol and Daryl are going to reunite. We all know that this is going to happen. Recently, in the Walking Dead spin-off shows, there has been a trend in whatever two characters they're trying to put together to create the story, reuniting in the first episode. They did this with Negan and Maggie's spin-off Dead City first, and then also with The Ones Who Live, which was Rick and Michonne's spin-off series. For Dead City, it was relatively easy, I'd submit. I mean, Negan and Maggie weren't buddies by any means when The Walking Dead ended, but they were relatively close to one another geographically when the series ended, and Dead City only takes place 3 years after the finale of the main show, so I don't think that reuniting those characters presented any kind of challenge for the writers whatsoever. For Rick and Michonne, it was a bit more challenging as we didn't really know where either of the two characters were until the end of the main show when we found out Rick's location. One thing I will say that I think was a very good decision for this show is they used the bridge as their reference point in time. It made it a lot easier to calculate exactly where we were on The Walking Dead's timeline, which is one of the ways in which the other shows have kind of left a bit to be desired. So for those who do not know, barring the absolute final scene, The Ones Who Live finale actually takes place around the time of the end of the original series, and then only shortly afterwards, Rick and Michonne are united with their kids once again. It's also then interesting to note that the fall of the original Commonwealth leadership and the CRM are both happening around the same time. This takes me back to one of the most interesting scenes from Season 1 of Daryl Dixon, where Carol tells Daryl on the radio that someone came back, but we don't know who. Could it be Rick? I think that's possible, but I'd also like to submit that Daryl wasn't on the road for an extremely long time, and it could be someone else. There is a part of me that would love to believe it is Rick, but then again I feel that if it was Rick, when Carol goes out to look for Daryl, he would have gone with her, which would have been a very cool to see and also recreated an interesting parallel to Season 1 of the original show, where as soon as Rick is reunited with his family, he goes out to rescue another Dixon. In that case, however, it was Daryl's biological brother, Merle. I do think that it would also create a very interesting dynamic if Carol doesn't know that Rick has come back either, because let's say he comes back after she leaves to go look for Daryl. This would make the reunion a lot more interesting to watch, as all three of them will be seeing each other for the first time, and we will finally once again get the original Dream Team together. I think for me personally, I'm hoping it isn't Rick. I do want them to reunite eventually, but I don't want things to be forced. I also think the dynamic of Carol not knowing that Rick is back is going to create for a really cool arc. I know one of the other theories that was surfacing around the time was that it was Morgan, as we knew he was making his way back to Alexandria at the conclusion of Fear the Walking Dead. However, I feel that if he came back, Carol probably wouldn't feel the need to tell Daryl this, and I feel the interaction would have been short to say the least. Something along the lines of, "Hey, have you seen Rick out there? We've been looking for him." And he would respond with, "No, that's why I came here, I was trying to find him." I think if it was Morgan, it would be really cool to see from the standpoint of reuniting with Rick, but because this is Daryl's show, there's another character that I would much rather prefer to see, and that is Dwight. Truth be told, the arc between Dwight and Daryl never really finished, and needless to say, its quote, end at the conclusion of the 8th season of the original show was not very much of an end. Dwight does go on to have several more arcs, becoming a very prominent figure in Fear the Walking Dead, which I have not personally seen all of, but I do know how it ends and some of the key plot elements. I really think that a Dwight-Daryl reunion is something that needs to happen. After Glenn's death at the beginning of Season 7, Daryl obviously becomes a very hateful person, especially towards the Saviors, and I think a lot of this internalized hate which he had for them was taken out on Dwight. Even though, on more than one occasion, Dwight showed that he felt sorry for and even grew to care for Daryl and the Alexandrians, probably because he saw some of himself in them. Dwight in and of himself was just another guy subject to the at the time power-hungry tyrant that was Negan, and in many ways it was for no fault of his own, but he had to do what he had to do to keep his wife alive. From my perspective, I think the reason Daryl hated Dwight so much was because Daryl couldn't exert the hate which he felt for Negan because Negan was just too powerful at the time. So hopefully, Season 2 of Daryl Dixon brings in some aspects of that storyline to the plot. Moving on now, I want to begin talking about Season 3, which has already been announced for 2025 and is going to be set in the gorgeous country of Spain. After the news of this season being set in Spain, theories and speculations have popped up throughout the fandom as to the possibility of us seeing a lesser-known character from the comics who's not even mentioned in the show. Featured in the spin-off comic The Alien, this person is Rick's brother, Jeffrey Grimes. Many of the fans who are strictly watchers of the show tend to be surprised at the fact that Rick has a brother. Canonically, though not written into the show, he plays a huge part into the storyline of Rick and Lori. In the comics, it is actually Jeff who brings Rick and Lori together. Being a couple years younger than Rick, and in many ways an outcast, Jeffrey would constantly be picked on, which caused Rick, who was looking out for his brother, to get him many schoolyard brawls. As soon as Jeffrey graduated, he went off to work construction jobs, traveling around the country, and when that got boring, he took his money and decided to go on a hiatus to Europe, in search of himself and who he truly was. In the spin-off comic, The Walking Dead: The Alien, we follow Jeffrey as he resides in, that's right, Spain, at the start of the outbreak of the virus in Europe. The comic follows him throughout a very short time at the start of the outbreak, but ultimately it unfortunately ends with his death. He ends up getting bitten while trying to save someone else and asks them to put him down and relay a message to his brother in the States if she's ever able to get there, which we don't know if she ever does or not. In the comics, it's one of the areas of the story that is left up to the interpretation of the reader, which I think executively was a very good decision. It adds to the airs of mystery that we're supposed to feel from these comics, and even one could argue, the show. These things are left unexplained, but not as plot holes, simply as things we're supposed to think about. It's how they were designed. Now, many are saying that it couldn't be him. If he is dead in the comics, he must be dead in the show. But the show is only an adaptation. I mean, the shows differ from the comics in so many different ways. For one, the comics are one complete story, ending with the death of Rick. He is executed by Pamela Milton's son Sebastian in the Commonwealth arc of the comics. Carl Grimes survives and marries Sophia, who was Carol's daughter. Rick marries Andrea, who is actually a much more bearable character in the comics than she is in the show. The show did not do her justice by any means. Michonne ends up with Ezekiel, and Carol dies very early in the comics by committing suicide using a walker. One of the most shocking things of all is that Daryl doesn't even exist in the comics. With that being said, in the comics, this entire storyline is impossible. Carol is dead and Daryl doesn't even exist. But seeing as how the creative freedom of the show writers has clearly extended so far beyond the comics at this point, I believe the idea of a Jeffrey Grimes storyline is actually a very real possibility. I also believe that if what I mentioned before about Carol not knowing of Rick's return is true, it could make the dynamic even more shocking if Jeffrey, Daryl, and Carol all go back to the United States and find Rick living in Alexandria or the Commonwealth, especially Jeffrey, who by this point would not have seen his brother for nearly 15 years. I am, all in all, extremely excited for the new season of Daryl Dixon. I think it will add so much to the Walking Dead universe, and I'm really excited for what all the miniseries are going to be pushing out within the next few years. What do you guys think about the possibility of meeting Jeffrey Grimes in the show, or even seeing Daryl and Rick reunite? Do you think the storyline with Dwight is a possibility to maybe finally finish the development of the story between the two characters? Let me know in the comments below, and as always, I will see you guys in the next video. Peace.